Magic Tree House, Book Number 37, Rhinos at Recess, by Mary Pope Osborne. Chapter 7. Move, baby, move. Clutching Speedy, Annie ran down toward the muddy creek. Jack ran with her. "Rosie, Rosita," Annie yelled. "Get out of the water!" "Come on, you two," Jack shouted. Speedy shrieked and whistled. The baby rhino seemed to smile at them. The mother lifted her huge head out of the water. She stared darkly at Jack and Annie. The helicopter was getting closer. "Hurry, Rosie, come out!" yelled Annie. "Try to catch us!" Rosie heaved herself up to a standing position in the creek. Muddy water poured off her thick body. "Get ready to run," Jack said to Annie. "Wait, what about the baby?" said Annie. The calf was still wallowing in the mud. "Rosita, get out, run after us," called Annie. "Move, baby, move," shouted Jack. He clapped his hands at the calf. Suddenly, the baby bounced out of the creek. Annie rushed to the small, muddy rhino. "Good for you," she said. "Annie, watch out for Rosie," shouted Jack. Quicker than he'd expected, Rosie had moved out of the water onto the grass. She started slowly toward Annie. She pawed the ground and made a growling sound. "Whoa, go, go," Jack called to Annie. Jack and Annie took off running as fast as they could. They raced back toward the trees and thorny bushes. When Jack looked over his shoulder, he saw Rosie galloping after them. Her legs bounded across the grass. The calf's stumpy little legs moved fast, too. The chopping sounds of the helicopter grew louder. "Climb back up the tree," Jack shouted at Annie. They ran to the umbrella-like tree. Annie let go of Speedy, and the bush baby leapt into the branches. Jack and Annie climbed after him. The three of them sat on bare branches. They were hidden by the thick cover of overhead leaves. The mother rhino followed them to the tree. She stood below them and huffed and snorted. "She's really mad," thought Jack. But at least she was hidden under the leafy canopy. "Stay there, Rosie," Annie cried. She turned to Jack. "Where's her baby?" "Over there," said Jack. The calf hadn't followed Rosie all the way to the tree. She was romping in the grass. "Oh no, Rosita!" Annie shouted. "Come over here!" Annie's voice could hardly be heard above the roar of the chopper. "What should we do?" Annie cried. "I don't know," said Jack. "Maybe the safari bus will come back soon, or Jomo and Shani," said Annie. She sounded like she might cry. The helicopter could be seen clearly now. Its spinning blades made whirring, chopping sounds. "The poachers will see the baby," Annie said. As the helicopter circled the area, the rhino calf kept playing. She could easily be spotted in the open. "I have to get her," said Annie. "No, you can't," said Jack. "The poachers will see her. I have to help," said Annie. She was in tears. "Don't climb down, Annie, please," said Jack. "Rosie won't understand. She'll attack you." The helicopter hovered above the dirt road. The spinning blades made a deafening sound. Slowly, the machine started to descend. "They're coming down!" cried Annie. As the chopper drew close to the ground, its blades stirred up a cloud of dust. "They're landing," said Annie. "I have to go down and protect Rosie and her baby. They're in terrible danger." "Wait, Annie, that's it, Morgan's rhyme," said Jack. He pulled the rhyme out of his pocket. He shouted Morgan's words above the roar of the chopper. "To chase away danger, here's what to do. Find a paper tree with roots at the top. Point to the giant. Say, 'Please make them stop.'" "We need a paper tree," cried Jack. Paper tree, he repeated, looking around in a panic. The helicopter had landed. The blades were slowing down. We're out of time, said Annie. Hold on, said Jack. He pulled the safari booklet out of his pocket. His hands shook as he turned the pages. He found the chart of rhino ancestors. He stared at the giant creature at the top of the chart and its descendants below. Jack, what are you doing? Said Annie. They're here. That's it, he said. The rhino family tree. What? Said Annie. A tree made of paper, said Jack, with roots at the top. It's not a real tree. It's this chart of rhino ancestors, the rhino family tree. Oh, wow, said Annie. Roots can mean ancestors, said Jack. He pointed to the top of the rhino family tree. And there's the giant. He glanced up. 2 men in dark masks were climbing out of the helicopter. Jack held up the illustration of the rhino family tree. Now, he said. Together, Jack and Annie shouted at the drawing of the giant prehistoric creature at the top of the page. Please make them stop. And then, something magnificent started to happen. Chapter 8. The Giant Great Ancestor. A blinding light flashed over the grasslands. The wind blew. Birds cried out. Trees and bushes trembled. Speedy swiveled his head to look around. He let out a shriek. Jack and Annie turned to look behind them. A creature was rising up from the blowing tall yellow grass. He had a massive head with upright ears. He had a thick neck as long as a giraffe's. Slowly, the creature rose to his full height. He stood as tall as a 2-story building. The body of the ancient creature was covered with hairless gray skin that looked like armor. His 4 legs were as thick as huge tree trunks. Rosie and her baby froze in place. The masked poachers stopped too. Annie and Jack gasped. The rhino's great ancestor, said Annie, from 30 million years ago. Oh man, Jack whispered. This isn't real. It's real, totally real, said Annie, and it's magic. The prehistoric rhino started moving toward them, his huge feet crushing the tall grass. As the creature came closer, his head swayed from right to left. He looked at the 2 smaller rhinos and the helicopter parked on the ground. Then he stopped and glared down at the 2 masked men. The giant let out a low, deep sound, a strange bellowing that seemed to come from a world before the time of humans. The creature's voice grew louder and louder until its booming roar shattered the air. The prehistoric giant started moving toward the poachers, faster and faster. His thundering footfalls shook the ground. The poachers howled in terror. They dashed the chopper. They scrambled back into the cockpit. The rotor blades started spinning. The helicopter lifted off the ground, rocking from side to side. A whirlwind of dust blew up from the dirt road. The chopper rose shakily through the dust. It almost tipped over. The ancient rhino looked up and bellowed again. The fleeing helicopter rose higher. It turned and sputtered away across the sky. The chopper was gone. The grasslands seemed stunned into a watchful silence. The birds and frogs were quiet. Rosie and her calf didn't move. Jack and Annie were speechless. Speedy broke the stillness. He slipped out of Annie's arms. Jabbering excitedly, he jumped down onto the baby rhino's back. From there, he leapt onto Rosie's head. From there, he scrambled onto the back of the ancient rhino. Speedy hugged the giant's neck. He made happy noises as if welcoming the ancient creature to this world. The huge rhino lowered his head and looked around again. Then he started moving toward Rosie and her baby. Jack held his breath, afraid for their safety. But as the giant stepped closer to them, Rosie and Rosita walked toward him as if to thank him. The giant rhino leaned over. He nuzzled Rosie's head with his own. Then the three of them stood calmly together. "Let's go down. It's safe now," Annie said. Jack nodded. He felt the same. The peace among the rhinos seemed to extend everywhere. Jack and Annie climbed down from the tree. They slowly approached the rhino family. Annie stroked the baby's head. Then she rested her hand on Rosie. "Hi there, this is your great ancestor," she said softly. "He saved you." Jack reached out and touched the leathery skin of the ancient ancestor. The giant gazed at Jack and Annie with soft, dark eyes. He dipped his large, curved head down to touch their heads. Then the creature stood up straight, looming over them all. "Thanks for saving them," said Annie, looking up at him. "Yes, thank you," Jack murmured. "Thank you for helping us." The giant seemed to nod. Then he turned and began walking away. Speedy climbed down from the creature's back and jumped into Annie's arms. Jack, Annie, Rosie, and her calf stood together. They watched the prehistoric rhino stop for a moment. He nibbled leaves from the top of the tallest umbrella-like tree. Then he kept plodding across the yellow plain. They watched the creature move through the tall swaying grass until he vanished into the bright African sunshine. "Goodbye," Annie said softly. Jack didn't speak. He was still in shock. Suddenly, the sound of an engine came from behind them. Jack and Annie turned and saw the ranger's jeep rumbling down the road. "Shani and Jomo!" cried Annie. "They're back!" The jeep came to a halt. The two rangers leapt out. "Get away from the rhinos, kids!" Jomo shouted. "You're in great danger!" No, we're not," said Jack, finding his voice. "Actually, we're fine. We're all totally fine."